Hey everybody, thank you so much for clicking on this video. Today, we are going to talk about some of my unpopular opinions as they relate to the fitness industry. I have formed these opinions over the past 6 years of coaching people, not only one-on-one, but also in group settings and virtually, and I am ready to defend them. But also if you disagree, let's have a nice chat in the comments. If you're new here, my name is Justina. I am a strength and conditioning coach based out of New York City, and I really enjoy breaking down complex concepts so you understand how your body works. If that sounds good to you, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos, and let's just dive right into the first unpopular opinion. The first thing I firmly believe is that optimal is overrated. And when I say optimal, I'm talking about things that state X is the best way to get Y. And now that every man with a PhD has access to podcast equipment, we've heard a lot more about optimization in the past few years as it relates to fitness and health. Cold plunging for recovery, protein timing for gains, specific exercises for glute growth. I feel like we've heard it all. And I will be the first person to admit that most of these optimization strategies are actually rooted in science or in actual studies. And don't get me wrong, controlled studies are great. They are the backbone of information that we have today as coaches to help support our clients and get them to their goals. But we also have to acknowledge the fact that a lot of these controlled studies are done in environments that don't always translate over to real life. Because let's just step back for a moment and take a look at real life for most people. Kids, work, commuting, probably commuting to a desk job, financial strains. I don't know about you guys, but the average cost of eggs in New York City right now is like $10. What? All I'm trying to say is that people in our country have a hard enough time meeting the bare minimum guidelines when it comes to fitness and health choices. So why are we pushing optimization? I think a lot of this really comes down to understanding your audience and understanding then how to best help your audience. For me, most of my audience on YouTube and then in the real world are general population, meaning these are people who are not competitors, they are not athletes, and most of the people who I work with simply want to look and feel better as they age. Now, every once in a while, I get pushback that people get offended when I say general population. That's not, it's not like a derogatory term. I'm just saying that your job does not rely on how your body looks or how you compete in a certain sport or type of movement. General population can still have more advanced goals. General population can still train with intensity. General population can still do hard things. I have a handful of general population clients who happen to run marathons. Is their training a little more specific, especially going around their run schedule and their training schedule? 100%. I'm not saying that I train all general population at the same level. We want to treat people as individuals. That's why people work with coaches one-on-one. But most of these clients still work a 9 to 5. Anyway, that's a side tangent, but I typically get someone pissed off that I called them general population. I'm general population. We're fine, everybody. Anyway, back to knowing your audience. So I feel like there are certain very popular podcasts nowadays where, these people who have these amazing credentials bring on experts in certain fields to talk about recovery methods and supplements and optimization of training schedules, fasting, and all of these things that are quite advanced and probably would be really great information for someone who's a competitor, an athlete, or even someone who is general population but has nailed all of the basics and are trying to train at a higher level. But I'm going to tell you right now with my full chest, I can guarantee you these very popular health and fitness podcasts, most of their audience is general population. And general population makes up most of the country. And let me tell you about the health of most of the country. Most people are not meeting the bare minimum for movement, for sleep, for nutrition. So personally, I think it's incredibly irresponsible to keep pushing these very advanced tactics, many of which cost money and are not going to fix the problem that Americans can't even meet the bare minimum. Let's look at a few examples. The current recommendation for strength training is 2 to 3 full body sessions per week of about 60 minutes each. Now this data is from 2020, but only 24% of US adults meet this strength training guideline. Diving into cardio, the current recommendation is 150 minutes of moderate activity weekly or 75 minutes of vigorous activity. This is going to be specifically referencing on where your heart rate is getting up to. This data is from 2022, but only half of Americans are meeting their cardio guidelines. Let's look at fiber. The current recommendation for women is 25 to 30 grams daily, and for men, it's 35 to 40 grams daily. This data is from 2021, but less than 10% of Americans are hitting their fiber guidelines. I could go on and on, but these are just a handful of basics that our country we're not hitting. People don't need to be marketed an athletic greens sponsorship. They need to grasp the concept of implementing these foundational basics into their probably busy lives and understand how to be realistic about the changes that they actually can make and what they actually can stick to. Because here's the thing, I made an entire video about honestly just like entire uproots of how our society functions that would actually help make most Americans healthy. You know, one of the bare minimum things is like healthcare. And I know some of you are screaming socialist. Cool. But anyway, you can go watch that video if you want to learn a little bit more about like the socioeconomic factors that do also influence our health. But all of this to be said is that if you are not hitting the bare minimum of your movement guidelines, of your nutrition guidelines, of your sleep guidelines, and you think that cold plunging or fasting or a new green supplement is going to help you fix your health, you're wrong. And I don't blame you. I blame people who have way too easy access to podcast equipment. So that's my first opinion. Hopefully it's not that unpopular, but let's move on to the second. My second unpopular opinion is that hip thrusts are overrated. Unless this is your first time here, you've probably heard me say this before. And we're gonna separate out like my personal feelings from hip thrusts because personally, just like as someone who works out, I'm not a big fan of them. They don't feel right on my body. The setup is always weird because I'm so short. And I just think it like takes way too long to set up for like the payoff. So personally for me, not into them as a person. We're gonna separate all of that out and we're just gonna talk about my aspect or my viewpoint as a coach. Because in theory, I have nothing against hip thrusts. And if you enjoy hip thrusts and you come to me and you say you want them in your program, we're gonna do them. I think they're really fun for people because they're pretty sturdy. You can load them up really heavy. You get that nice glute burn. And from a training standpoint, it's a great bilateral hip dominant exercise. You get to work the glutes in the shortened position where a lot of other exercises that target the glutes like RDLs, lunges, we're gonna see that more in the lengthened position. So we're getting some variety in how we actually use the glutes. But from my personal experience working with people one-on-one, I find that many people are very tight in their glutes or they don't have a lot of space in their posterior hip capsule. So instead of jumping right to hip thrusts simply because they're gonna build your glutes up, I'm gonna look more at function overall. And if you're tight back there, I'm gonna work first on creating length through the glutes and creating space in the back of the hip. And I tend to see this a lot with people who sit a lot during the day. Sitting a lot during the day can create some excess tension in the glutes and create a little bit more of like a closed off posterior hip capsule. So if someone comes to me, even with a glute growth goal, but I find that they really don't move well in their hips, they're lacking that internal hip rotation, they can't really create space back there without getting into their lumbar, why am I gonna keep training that position that they're already favoring? The stuff that you're bad at is probably the stuff that you need a little bit more of. Look, we're not robots. We're never gonna be like perfectly symmetrical, perfectly balanced side to side, front to back, whatever. But if we feed these imbalances more and more and more and more and more, that's when we're gonna cause issues down the line. And when I say issues, a lot of times people jump to like worst case scenario, like, oh, I tore my ACL, now I need surgery and I'm bedbound. I'm even just talking about like the little chronic things that nag you over and over and over and keep popping up that will keep you out of the gym for a month or two at a time. That's more so the stuff that I see rather than like, you know, routine halting injuries that require surgery. So all of that to be said, please don't take away from this that hip thrusts are bad. Hip thrusts are not bad. They're a great exercise. I just find that again, working with people one-on-one, general population, people who sit a lot, that's a lot of our society, they're not the best option at first. I just think that with all of the glute specialists out there, the hip thrust has really been overrated in terms of a movement pattern. Let's move on. All right, my third and final opinion is that you should have to sit for a basic personal training certification. So what does this mean, sit? Basically, I believe that for a basic personal training certification, you should have to take a proctored exam. So proctored, I know that you can do it like online now where someone like looks at, like shares your screen and like watches you. I don't really understand that technology and how that works. And you know, I think that's great too. But anytime that I've taken a proctored exam, you have to go to a proctoring center, you lock all your stuff in a locker, they check your pockets, they pat you down. It's actually like really intense. And then you like sit at this computer, like this old ass desktop from like 1995 and you take your exam and yeah. I did this originally with my NASM CPT back in 2018. And then I recently did it, I don't think I've said this yet. I recently did this last month in February for the CSCS certification through NSCA, and I passed. Yay! The reason that was such a big deal to me is I think the pass rate is like 42% on your first try, and it's 2 parts. Like there's 2 different exams. You could have passed like one part, not the other, and vice versa, or you could not pass the whole thing. So yeah, very proud of myself. Yay. Okay. So here's the reason why I think that everyone should have to sit for an exam, whether it's proctored in person or proctored remote. The barrier to entry to work as a coach is already so low. And by so low, I mean there's none. You actually don't legally need an ounce of education, any type of certification, nothing to coach individuals, which, as you can imagine, leads to a lot of genetically gifted people who have never trained anybody but themselves, who know nothing about exercise science, selling programs, and scamming people, basically. And while I don't think every piece of continuing education needs to be proctored, I do think that the like basic certification, so like your certification that you're submitting CEUs to or continuing education credits to, that should be proctored. It puts a lot of pressure on you to actually understand and retain the information. You know, this came up in topic recently because I saw that NASM now offers like a certificate, I think, where like you don't have to take a proctored exam, like you can take a non-proctored one. I think that's a money grab. Like they're lowering the barrier to entry to make more money. And I don't know, like I know a lot of people get like the basic ACE or NASM because a lot of big box gyms won't hire you unless you have that. And I don't know if big box gyms are now gonna accept this like certificate from a non-proctored exam. I don't know the answer to that. But more importantly, I don't think NASM cares. I've talked about NASM a few times in other videos recently, and I just don't like where they're going. I think lowering the barrier to entry is not a great place to be. I think if you want to lower the barrier to entry to be a coach, you as a business, well, I guess as a business that doesn't make sense, but I don't know. I think the barrier to entry is a financial hurdle for a lot of people, which I get. Like, you have to pay for education, you have to invest in it, but some people aren't in the place to do that. So I think, I mean, if you actually want, this is what it comes down to. Do you want money or do you want great coaches under your name? And unfortunately, I feel like in the past, like 5 years, ever since COVID, and I feel like they had to like get money into their business, they've just been creating bullshit certifications, lowering the barrier to entry. And I honestly don't respect it, but I'm also not really into capitalism, as you can probably guess from this video. So anyway, I just feel like they've been diluting their product and their brand to make money. On the flip side, NSCA, which is where I'm like ditching NASM. I'm never giving them money ever again. So now my new basic certification is CSCS, which stands for Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. And let me tell you, that exam has gotten way harder over the last few years. I know this because they've said it, but I did do like a study course through a physical therapist who keeps up with all of the changes on the CSCS exam. He has the certification as well, and he also says, as someone who has kept up with the changes being made, yes, it's harder. You can also see that because the pass rate on your first try has gone down. I actually misquoted it earlier. It is 39%. 39% of people pass on their first try, both sections. The other way that they have, or they are, raising the standards of who can even sit for this exam is that right now you do need a bachelor's degree to even take the exam. But I believe by 2030, they're changing it that you need a bachelor's degree in a relevant field. Do we all see another reason why I did this now? In case you're new here, I have a theater degree. So I don't think that's relevant. And look, I also just want to acknowledge that I understand that there are people who maybe have disabilities in some way who won't do well in a proctored exam. I already said that the cost of education of getting, you know, these certifications is definitely a barrier to entry. Obviously, where you live, like getting to a testing center can have a huge impact. Luckily, again, a lot of these places do like virtual proctoring too. So I realize what I'm saying isn't perfect, and lucky for everybody, I don't make the rules. No one's taking this advice. Like NASM doesn't give a fuck what I say. I'm just more so coming at it from the lens of there's so much bullshit out there and confusion because you have people who are uneducated acting as experts. And I do believe that this would help eliminate a lot of that, as well as having some sort of like law that, I mean, it's like with meal plans. Most places in the US or most states in the US, unless you're a registered dietitian, you can't sell meal plans. Do people do it anyway? Unfortunately, but at least it's a law. I just think that raising the bar of being a fitness professional to like, you have to be educated, I don't think that's a bad thing. So anyway, those are my 3 unpopular opinions. I would love to hear if you have one down below. So leave it down in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.